This is the Odyssey by Homer, and this is in the philosophy section of the reading list. In hindsight, I could have read the Odyssey after the Iliad, since it chronologically takes place following the events of the latter by some 10 years. Regardless, the two tales, although different in scope, plot, and style, are threaded together through references and allusions to the Iliad's Trojan War events, scattered throughout the Odyssey tale. In both tales, the world they exist in feels roughly equivalent, at least in tonal disposition. And in both, we are transported to the ancient lands of what is now modern-day Greece and Turkey, where gods and humans engage in alliances, deceptions, disputes, and affairs, carnal and platonic. This world is not a fair one, in the normal sense we expect today. Maybe in part since what we expect now has evolved over time and includes our modern day indoctrination into the Western legal traditions and metaphysical social substrates, many of which come from Judeo-Christian tradition, but rather a world of divine fate, wherein the best people can do is adhere to some kind of inherent honor code and humility practiced in the eyes of the gods, in order to balance out the excessive egoism and hubris which ultimately lead to the downfall of peoples and societies. But even this underlying code is not always enough when gods often choose favorites and mortal futures at a whim, whatever their inclination and whenever their mood may stray. We begin our adventure in Odysseus' homeland of Ithaca, where his loyal wife Penelope is involuntarily hosting suitors intent on winning her heart and marrying into property and title. Odysseus' son Telemachus is persuaded by the goddess Athena to leave his mother Penelope and seek out information regarding his father's fate, following the closure of the Trojan War. Telemachus sails to Sparta and meets Nestor and the king of Sparta, Menelaus. By now, the Trojan War is over by many years, and Menelaus has returned to Sparta with his wife Helen, the same woman abducted by Paris, an event that years earlier triggered the Trojan War. Here, we learn of the fates of two famed heroes from the Iliad. Locrian Ajax, brother of Telamonian Ajax, has since drowned by the hand of the god Poseidon. Poseidon, upon hearing the taunts of Ajax earlier, quote, "In the teeth of the gods I have escaped the ocean's sheer abyss," end quote, takes action against him in typical angry god fashion. Quote, "Poseidon heard that frantic vaunt and struck the Gyrian headland, hacked the rock in two, and the giant stump stood fast, but the jagged spur where Ajax perched at first, the raving madman toppling into the sea. It plunged him down into the vast seething depths, and so he died, having drunk his fill of brine." End quote. We learn of Agamemnon's fate as well, one of premeditated deception and treachery by his own men in his own hall, wherein he's cut down by the heartless Agastheus upon his return from war. As we will see in the coming passages, the fates of men in Homer's ancient Greece more often end in tragedy, suffering, and violence, and, on occasion but much less often, with honor and glory. What fate shall our hero Odysseus meet in the end? Odysseus is introduced to us on the island of Ogygia, the home of the nymph Calypso. Odysseus has been enslaved, more like sex-slaved, on the island for 10 years by Calypso. I suppose being stuck on an island with a goddess and a lifetime supply of ambrosia would get old eventually. Personally, I'd probably be able to handle 10 years with no complaints. Regardless, the gods have other plans for Odysseus, as Hermes instructs Calypso to, quote, "Release him at once, just so, steer clear of the rage of Zeus," end quote. He sails toward Ithaca with the help of the gods, only to be thwarted by the wrath of Poseidon. Poseidon really doesn't like Odysseus. Instead, Odysseus crashes onto the shores of Phaeacia, leagues away from his beloved home. With the help of Athena, he makes it into the great halls of Alcinous, king of Phaeacia. After feasting and contests sponsored by the king, Odysseus tells the Phaeacians his story. Following the conclusion of the Trojan War in Troy, Odysseus sets home only to be blown off course to Ismarus, the stronghold of the Cicones, somewhere along the coast of Thrace. Odysseus and crew promptly, quote, sacked the city, killed the men, but as for the wives and plunder, that rich haul we dragged away from the place, we shared it round so no one, not on my account, will go deprived of his fair share of spoils. End quote. Already we have a glimpse of the mercy and compassion possessed by the royal son of Laertes. Sarcasm. Sailing from Ismarus with their plunder, Odysseus and crew endure a storm brought forth by Zeus. They sail off course for 10 days and soon reach the land of the lotus eaters. Some of his crew succumb to the potent lotus fruit and lose their memory and desire to sail home. Odysseus gathers the affected men and they sail on, accidentally, I'm assuming, to the land of the Cyclops. This is the land of the one-eyed giants with, quote, no meeting place for council, no law either, no. Up on the mountain peaks they live in arching caverns, each a law to himself, ruling his wives and children, not a care in the world for any neighbor. End quote. His men short on food, they sneak into one of the caves while a resident Cyclops is out tending his flock of sheep, and they help themselves to some fresh cheese. The Cyclops returns, blocks the entrance with a large boulder, and, without knowing, blocks Odysseus and his men inside. He soon discovers them and promptly, quote, snatching two at once, rapping them on the ground, he knocked them dead like pups. Their brains gushed out all over, soaked the floor, and ripping them limb from limb. To fix his meal, he bolted them down like a mountain lion, left no scrap, devoured entrails, flesh and bones, marrow and all. End quote. The following evening, he pulls the old rinse and repeat, devouring two more men. Seeing the futility of the situation at hand, Odysseus coordinates a plan with his men. Pour the Cyclops wine until he passes out, then stab his singular eye with a burning olive stake. With the Cyclops asleep from excess wine, Odysseus then, quote, thrust our stake in a bed of embers to get it red hot, and rallied all my comrades, end quote. And then, quote, so we seized our stake with its fiery tip, and bored it round and round in the giant's eye till blood came boiling out around that smoking shaft, and the hot blast singed his brow and eyelids round the core, and the broiling eyeball burst. Its crackling roots blazed and hissed, as a blacksmith plunges a glowing axe or adze into an ice-cold bath, and the metal screeches steam, and its tempers harden. That's the iron strength. So the eye of the Cyclops sizzled round that stake. End quote. The following morning, the Cyclops, now blind and in severe pain, opens his cave entrance to let his flock out. With his cunning, Odysseus convinces his men to clutch the underside of the Cyclops' sheep as they begin their march out of the cave. The Cyclops touches each sheep as they pass underneath him. The men sneak through the cave entrance, holding the sheep undersides. Odysseus and what remains of his crew return to their ships and set sail. Ever the humble type, Odysseus can't resist a final taunt directed at the Cyclops. Quote, would to God I could strip you of life and breath and ship you down to the house of death. As surely as no one will ever heal your eye, not even your earthquake god Poseidon himself. End quote. Odysseus, your cunning is surely matched by your hubris. His taunts against the gods and the sons of gods, like Cyclops, do him no favors. The Cyclops follows up with a prayer to his father, Poseidon, then tosses a boulder from his cave entrance that nearly smashes one of the ships. Poseidon is pissed now, too. Words of advice, don't talk shit to the gods. Bruh. After the near boulder hit, the crew leave in haste and make their way to a floating island, home to the god Aeolus. He gives Odysseus a sack filled with air to assist his journey home. His crew, unbeknownst of the internal contents of the sack, open it while Odysseus sleeps. The air explodes out and sends them wildly off course. They return to Aeolus, and he tells them to eat poo-poo more or less since they disrespected his gift. So they row away directionless into the land of the Lastrygonians. Dun dun dun. The crew approach their palace with caution, only to find out the Lastrygonians are giants who eat men. The giants promptly eat a couple crewmates, pandemonium ensues, and the crew escapes to their ships, a couple more men short. Next stop is the land of the bewitching queen Circe, or Circe. I don't know the pronunciation exactly. Hoping for a little respite from their difficult journey, the crew approach her palace optimistic but ever cautious. Eurylochus senses a trap and stays outside her palace with the ships. Smart man. She feeds the crew, then, blam, magic wand, turns them into swine. Eurylochus tells Odysseus of their fate, and Odysseus turns towards Circe's gates. Before Odysseus enters, Hermes intervenes and gives him a potion to counter Circe's spells. Soon after Odysseus enters Circe's palace, she attempts to transform Odysseus into a pig, only to be thwarted by his potion. She falls to his knees in distress and confusion at the impotence of her magic. Odysseus demands that all his crew be turned back into men, and soon thereafter, Circe returns them to their original form, has them bathed in oil, clothed, and fed. Now, in better regard with the crew, Circe insists the crew embark on a side journey to the house of death to consult with Tiresias. Odysseus agrees, and they sail off. Upon entering the house of death, Odysseus sees the ghosts of many familiar and mythological characters, including Epicaste, mother of Oedipus; Agamemnon, supreme commander of the Achaeans during the Battle of Troy; Achilles, the greatest warrior in the Trojan War, half god; Ajax, arguably the second greatest warrior in the Trojan War, and a hulk of a man, death by suicide, fell on his sword, originally Hector's sword; Patroclus, great friend and mentor to Achilles; Antilochus, son of King Nestor; Orion, the mythical hunter; Tydeus, two vultures forever eating his liver while his hands fruitlessly try to beat them off; Tantalus, forever standing parched and erect in a pool but never able to drink; the trees with fruit above just out of reach; Sisyphus, caught in an endless cycle of pushing a boulder to the top of a hill, only to have it roll back down near the peak; Minos, a son of Zeus, holding his golden scepter and judging all the dead, and many others. If anything can be said of the ancient Greeks, they had a vivid and interesting mythological lineage. Also, as a side note, I wonder if the modern word tedious is related to Tydeus, or how the word tantalizing, how about the word tantalizing and Tantalus? Finally, what about Sissy and Sisyphus? When people can't move a large object, they may be called sissies. The meaning of all these words seem to relate in part to the context of these characters, respectively, above. Beyond the reunions with old friends, apart from Ajax, who still loathes Odysseus after he was awarded Achilles' armor, Odysseus comes to the house of the dead to meet Tiresias. Tiresias imparts warnings fast and hard. Don't eat Helios's cattle when you sail past them, or your ship and crew will be lost. And a bunch of dudes are holed up in your home in Ithaca, eating your food and drinking your wine, and mostly trying to bang your distressed wife. Oh, and don't forget to offer a sacrifice to Poseidon. Otherwise, shit's going down, buddy. Odysseus and crew take note.